Ukraine should not get any more money. Ukraine has stolen money from the United States. The funding that war has been a money laundering operation, and everyone knows it. There should be no more funding for Ukraine.
Ma'am, your district in Georgia is one of the most patriotic districts in this country. What do your constituents tell you about Ukraine?
Oh, they're fed up with it. They're absolutely done. And it's not just my district, Steve. 70% of Americans, that shows in polling. That's a statistic that no one can ignore. No one can ignore that. 70% of Americans do not want to send any more money to Ukraine. Our government at the same time is funding a war that most people do not support in a country that no one can find on a map, hardly.
It's great to be joined by Congressman Ro Khanna. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Great to be on, Luke.
So I have a bunch of questions for you. You saw just there, we led in with clips of Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she was telling lies about Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine is one of the reasons she's trying to oust Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, him wanting to fund aid to Ukraine. Respond, if you would, to that, these talking points about funding to Ukraine being a money laundering operation or something. And then also give me your thoughts on Marjorie's motion to vacate the chair.
Well, first of all, the questioner says, isn't yours one of the most patriotic districts? The last I checked, we have 435 patriotic districts in this country. And then the polling that she cites is just wrong. I mean, I'll be factual about it. The reality is she may be hearing from her constituents overwhelming opposition because, unfortunately, the polling shows that Republicans are overwhelmingly opposed to the funding. But actually, with Democrats, the majority think that either we're spending too little or we're spending enough. And overall, it's about 60-40 in the American people who believe that we're spending either too little or enough. And you don't have to take my words for it. You can just look at the AP poll on the issue. Of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't want to deal in facts on this issue. And there's no evidence for what she's citing. I mean, look, do I believe every single dollar has been efficiently spent? No one is making that claim. But the vast majority of arms and aid that has gone to Ukraine has allowed them to stand up to Putin and make sure that Putin doesn't march into Kiev. And the question for us really is, do we want to just give Putin a green light to take over a large chunk of Ukraine, or do we want to stand up to Putin and make sure that we allow Ukraine to defend their territorial integrity? I believe the president has done a tremendous job to help Ukraine without getting into a war with Russia, and the aid is absolutely critical. I am hopeful Johnson will bring it to the floor. There are House Democrats like me who, if he does that, will be open to working with him so that Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion doesn't succeed.
Okay. And so first I was going to ask as a follow-up, do you think this is a bluff to sort of get in the headlines, but she's not going to bring it to the floor, or is she going to charge forward with it? Obviously I know you're speculating on that, but then if indeed she does, obviously last time Democrats, I think rightfully so, didn't jump in to save Kevin McCarthy. In this case, do you see there being a chance of Democrats, like you said, for the sake of foreign aid or something else, jumping in and working with Mike Johnson to protect him?
Well, I've never been able to predict Marjorie Taylor Greene. If I was guessing, though, I would say that she's serious about bringing it. I wouldn't discount her threats, and my sense is that if Johnson proceeds with a Ukraine bill, she's likely to bring it. Now, whether it succeeds or not is a different question. A lot will depend on Democratic votes. And I do think if Johnson were to bring a clean Ukraine bill to the House floor, especially given how close we are to the election, that there would be Democrats willing to defeat a motion to vacate. Even progressive Democrats like me would look at doing that if he were to bring a clean Ukraine bill to the floor.
Wow. What a world we're in. Progressives maybe going to save MAGA Mike. So I want to play 2 clips of you on Fox. He's actually just covered one of your moments there at the precipice for this interview. But here are a couple others for the audience, and then we'll discuss.
The job creation is at a record high. Let's just look at some basic facts. Since the president has come into office, almost 14 million jobs created. Now, 70% of those are jobs that were recovered.
Can I just get in there? Because I try not to interrupt, but created is it's a very interesting word. Can you tell me what specific policy under this president created those jobs?
Yes, I actually can. The American Rescue Plan, which put in money into infrastructure and into helping people stay employed in small businesses. The infrastructure bill, which has led to a boom in construction jobs. The CHIPS Act, which has led to a boom in manufacturing. I'm acknowledging.
The reason I ask is because a lot of that was a rebound from the COVID pandemic, correct?
70% of those jobs were recovered from the COVID pandemic. I'm acknowledging that. But here's the point. You know, it was recovered within 2 years because of the American Rescue Plan. We could have been in a Great Depression. Give the president credit for the recovery and the creation of new jobs.
Okay.
And the reality is that this was the policy of the American Rescue Plan, of the CHIPS Act, of the infrastructure, of the Inflation Reduction Act. 4% unemployment used to be considered full employment in this country. The inflation in this country at 3.7% is less than inflation anywhere else in the world.
Okay.
There were a number of GOP senators who went to the border. They're back here in D.C. talking about the issue of the fentanyl crisis. Here's what they had to say.
Joe Biden doesn't give a damn about Americans. And why would I say that? 70,000 Americans died of fentanyl overdose. Why? Joe Biden doesn't care. He has a completely open border.
President Biden could use this health crisis of fentanyl poisonings to implement Title 42. He could do that today.
I believe it's GOP Senator Bill Hagerty who's got a proposal legislatively to give the power to the president to do this, to trigger Title 42 with fentanyl as the health crisis. Would you support that?
Shannon, first of all, the exact problem with politics is what Senator Scott said. I mean, come on. President Biden doesn't give a damn about Americans. Here's someone who has dedicated his entire life to public service. I would never say that about President Trump. I would not say that he doesn't care about Americans. So why don't we actually deal with the issues instead of these ad hominem attacks on our presidents? Of course I would support stronger policy to get fentanyl out of America. I'm concerned about China that's been shipping it. It's wrong. I've heard the testimony in Congress of mothers who've lost their children. And let's solve that. I mean, instead of launching ad hominem attacks at the president.
So I want to circle back to the border, but one of the things you do really well, as I previously mentioned, is go on Fox. And there aren't that many Democratic leaders, politicians who do that. And, you know, it's an attempt to reach out to disaffected Republicans in a place where they're actually at. And right now we're seeing those disaffected Republicans, it seems, increasing in numbers. Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis still winning votes in primaries they're not even running in anymore. And so to focus in on the Nikki Haley contingent, before circling back to the subject of the border that was brought up in one of those clips, we're seeing these polls showing a bunch of Nikki Haley voters don't want to even vote for Trump potentially in the general. What do you think the message, what are the issues that you need to bring to those voters to bring them into Biden's camp? Or is it not even a worthwhile endeavor to go after those voters?
Well, it's a worthwhile endeavor to go after every voter, as long as we're being consistent in what we stand for and emphasizing that part of our platform that may appeal to them. If I were looking at Nikki Haley voters, I think the president should talk about his leadership when it comes to standing up for Ukraine. I mean, Nikki Haley was throughout the debates talking about the importance of standing up to Putin, the importance of standing with our NATO allies. I think there will be a contingent of voters who will see the president as the adult in the room and really concerned about American leadership if Donald Trump is there. I would emphasize the importance of respecting American institutions of democracy and the peaceful transition of power. And I would talk about abortion rights. I think there are a group of suburban women in particular who have real concerns. They may not agree with my position on abortion rights and 100% support for a woman's right to choose as a matter of equality, but they certainly don't want a 6-week abortion ban or the type of extremism that courts currently have. And I think with those three issues, we can win over a fair chunk of Nikki Haley voters.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that's making me hopeful in this election is seeing some of the anecdotal evidence in these interviews with Nikki Haley voters, seeing them understand, you brought up democracy, that yes, the progressives of the world and the Nikki Haley voters of the world can and should battle it out over policy and disagree over lots of issues, but we can't do that if our democracy falls apart, and many of them get that and are going to vote accordingly, which is really exciting to see. So the border was the subject of the Rick Scott clip that Fox played, and I've been going a little bit crazy, Congressman, watching Democrats getting hurt so much on this issue. The polls consistently show Trump beating Biden in people's approval of either candidate on this particular subject, even though I don't feel like that's justified. So let me frame this to you as Fox would, or someone in right-wing media would, and then I'm curious to see how you'd reframe it and add the proper context. So the border is open, Congressman. Why did Biden open the border?
Well, first of all, the border is secure under the president. But here's what I think is so sad about what we're doing in this country. We just had 6 immigrants who are building, who are helping build the Baltimore Bridge die in an accident. And now they're going to be immigrants who are going to help rebuild that. We've always been a nation of immigrants, from the Irish to the Italians to people like my parents who came as Indian Americans. And the immigrant communities contribute to our economy. They're going to help us make sure that we stay ahead of China and Russia. They're going to help us become a manufacturing superpower. They're going to help us build industry. And the demonization of immigrants in this country, calling them saying that they're polluting the bloodstream. It's a type of rhetoric that Ronald Reagan would never have engaged in, that Lincoln would never have engaged in, that we've never really seen aspirationally for America. So let's start by recognizing what immigrants contribute to this nation and why they make America exceptional. And then let's talk about actually solving the border problem, which this president has tried to do over and over and over again. Since the day he came to office, he has put forth budgets saying, let's have more Border Patrol agents. The Republicans have said no. He has said, let's have more immigration judges to process the issue. The Republicans have said no. He said, let's have a path to citizenship for the 12 to 15 million undocumented, all of who, by the way, were here in the beginning of Donald Trump's presidency and at the end. So this idea that they're going to leave America is totally wrong. I mean, they were here during Trump's administration. And by the way, they're being exploited. They're being paid cheap wages. They're hurting American workers. President Biden said, let's have them get a path to citizenship so they can be paid a fair wage, so they can be part of unions, so they can help rebuild America. The Republicans said no. So the Republicans want no solution. They want to demonize immigrants in contrast to this country's tradition. And for 3.5 years, they've been resisting this president's effort at getting a solution.
Very nicely said. Yeah, I do think I was talking about in a past segment the importance of, sometimes I'll skip to the policy conversation and say, well, if we want to talk about policy on the border, here's all the things Democrats have been wanting to do. And especially with the recent example of this bipartisan border deal, Republicans obviously at the direction of Trump shooting it down. And so sometimes in jumping to that because you want to get to the policy conversation, you can skip over rejecting the dangerousness of much of the rhetoric we're hearing coming from the right. And so I do appreciate the way you did that, not accepting their premise of the poisoning of the blood and all this horrible stuff while getting into that conversation. So moving on from that, you recently had an Atlantic profile come out about you, and it discussed your vision for the future of the Democratic Party. And you described in it the new economic patriotism, as you see it, that captures the imagination of voters. Tell our audience more about that vision and just expand on that.
Look, it's a pretty simple idea. My district in Silicon Valley, Apple, Google, NVIDIA, Tesla, has $10 trillion of wealth. Young folks think the world is their oyster. They are hopeful about the American dream. Yet so many parts of this country, rural America, the heartland, Black and brown communities have been left out of modern economic prosperity. We need to bring economic jobs, wealth generation opportunities for prosperity to every district in this country. We can do it by having a new industry that marries new technology that can do amazing things, AI, which is going to increase productivity with industrialization, to create new clean steel, to create new machine tools in this country, to have new automobile parts, to have new shipping, so have new industry and new factories in every part of this district and deindustrialized towns. Let's create new technology jobs in every part of America, including with historically Black colleges and Hispanic servicing institutes, and really work on economic revitalization in every part of this country, and an economic bill of rights that says people should have childcare, housing, and education as the prerequisites to being able to succeed. And I think that vision resonates because it's true, and it can help unify this country.
So you've been on the road as a surrogate for President Biden and said we haven't been driving a clear message, and we have to have a better message on the economy, as you touched on there. We have to have a better message on immigration. And I want to get to that to contextualize it a little bit. I talk about on a daily basis what I perceive to be this hugely significant and long list of achievements the Democrats are responsible for just in the last few years. And so my audience specifically could rattle off those things. But most Americans I talk to in my life, even just anecdotally, and the polls show this too, aren't aware of most of those policy efforts that are being made. And same goes for economic progress, crime plummeting. And so you have these issues where there's still outstanding pain, obviously, and there's so much work that has to be done. But for people to want to reelect Democrats in office, they have to see that things have been getting done to improve their lives. So separate from the message being good or bad, and I think the message at its core is good about what has been done and what needs to be done from many Democrats, Joe Biden specifically, what is it that surrogates or Biden himself are falling short on in actually getting that message to people? Because it stuns me, the lack of an awareness is out there about just some of the basic core achievement items of Joe Biden's presidency.
Well, one, we have to be visible and present everywhere. I know this may sound like a banal observation, but I was in Nevada. I was talking to one of the captains in the firefighters there, who's going to vote for Robert Kennedy if Kennedy gets on the ballot. And we were talking about issues, and he was with us on a number of issues. And I said, "What is the big reason you're voting for Robert Kennedy?" And he said, "Robert Kennedy is on every podcast that he can think of. And being at the fire station, he listens to a lot of podcasts with other folks there because they have some downtime. And he said, we're not on those podcasts in the same way, and he finds them very accessible." So the reality of the modern media environment is you can't just give a State of the Union address and think that the American people have heard you. My mom would have heard you, and that's great. You got her vote. But you've got to be out like you are, Luke, on YouTube, on TikTok, on podcasts, and you've got to saturate every media outlet, and then you've got to travel to communities, district after district, to have roundtables and make the case. And I think that the problem with our messaging is not what we're saying, but the distribution channels of where we're saying it, not recognizing how fragmented the media environment is and being aggressive enough to take advantage of every channel.
Exactly, yes. Satisfying to hear that for sure, because I think that's exactly it. And for the most part, just recently I was having a bunch of conversations with people around my age, and it's the same answer to all my questions, which is, I don't know, just didn't hear about that. That sounds good, but didn't hear that was even a thing that was happening. And I think for a long time, Democrats fell into the idea that facts speak for themselves. And one of the things I say a lot is that's just not the case, unfortunately. And you have to go out there and make people know about the facts. And then I heard you in, I think, one of the interviews I covered on the show, framing it importantly, yes, the record, but also what could happen going forward. And that should be emphasized a lot too. One of the topics sort of connected to this is I've heard you talk about, and one of the things I just recently covered extensively was how sort of COVID grief is playing into people's perception of Biden's presidency. And there was an Atlantic piece that was really interesting from psychologists who were taking that sort of approach and saying a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the negative feelings about Biden's presidency come from this understandable remaining grief and pain from the pandemic and all the conditions that it spiraled out of control. Do you think, as we go into this election, it's strategically important to remind people of that context of what things were like as Trump left and Biden took over? And how do you think we message on that?
Yes, I think this gets to the heart of the issue about the question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Most of us, at least Democrats, think, of course we are. We don't have to worry and wake up every morning about seeing what crazy tweet Donald Trump's going to be putting out, and worry about the human rights of immigrants in this country, worry about the rights and human rights and dignity of women, worry about some crazy policy that's going to provoke a possible conflict. But there is one sense, I think, when people who are Republicans or independents say, "Oh, we prefer 4 years ago," I think they're thinking of a time prior to COVID. And the reality is, of course, Donald Trump's leadership during COVID was disastrous. That's why he lost. And we need to remind people of that, not this sort of pre-COVID days, but okay, Donald Trump was president right when COVID hit. We had hundreds of thousands of people die. We had the unemployment rate go through the roof. And then it started to come down, but it was really President Biden who got the public health situation under control, who got the unemployment rate under control with the American Rescue Plan, and who started to get inflation under control with his policies. And I do think that there is this grief that we went through with COVID. There is this hardship of economic times we went through. And we need to say, look, contrast how Trump and Biden handle that in making your decision going forward.
Exactly. So last question. In the Atlantic piece, you said, quote, one of the challenges we have as a country is we have a wrong stereotypical view of the Trump voter. And I think in this current moment, obviously, there's a lot of negative feelings in this space about the stereotypical Trump voter. And I've talked to many of them at rallies and those clips. You look at the comments and it's some pretty vicious stuff. And there's an understandable rage at people who would support someone so dangerous, who wants to take rights away and threatens our democracy. And so this conversation is not to invalidate the understandable outrage from people on that. But I do agree that it is important to not just completely push to the side those voters. And so then how do you see that happening when you say we have this wrong stereotypical view of the Trump voter? Presumably you think we need to overcome that to engage with them. What is the approach to Trump voters, or let's say Biden wins and sort of Trump fades out of political relevance, former Trump supporters who were so pulled into the culty world that it seems impossible to pull them out?
Well, Luke, first, I would just say about Russell Berman's piece in The Atlantic, don't read the parts about me, but read the end where he talks about one of my favorite teachers and how I meet him in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He's my favorite teacher growing up, Mr. Longo, and how I am shocked, and Russell Berman, the writer, is surprised that this teacher who's praising me as a student ends up being a two-time Trump voter. And it's really thoughtfully written, those few paragraphs, and worth a read. And then the question is, that's what I meant, that you can't stereotype Trump voters. I would have never guessed that the teacher I remember dressing up as Theodore Roosevelt and coming into class and having us do mock sessions on the Treaty of Versailles negotiations had become a Trump supporter. So how do we engage with someone like him? First, don't come with dripping moral judgment where we somehow think that the person is bad intentioned or doesn't understand the diverse society we live in, or has a backward view. Engage with respect and understand what the person's concerns may be. In some cases, it may be a feeling that their life has not improved, their family's life has not improved. In some cases, it may be a sense that we need a common purpose as a country again, not just speaking for individual communities, but some sense of common mission. That's what I call an economic patriotism, to rebuild America. In some sense, it just may be an acknowledgement that we have our convictions on issues, but that doesn't mean that we don't respect difference and that we don't respect free speech. So I think that the Democratic Party needs to go into these communities, talk to folks honestly and openly, and offer with respect a common mission for America again, to inspire them. And we can. You know how I know we can? Because there's still a lot of Trump-Obama voters. We forget that Obama won these states, Wisconsin, Ohio, with landslides. And, you know, candidly, I think he would do it again. I think he would win again in a landslide. And so let's learn from some of the things that he did.
Congressman Ro Khanna, I really appreciate your time today and would love to have you on in the future.
Thank you, Luke. Thanks for your voice out there.